We're returning to the topic of live service slash games as a service game design for today's video because I want to talk about a recent game that has gotten a major update and kind of how it best exemplifies the pros and cons a lot of people feel about the practice. As we have said many times over, the use of games as a service as a way of running and developing a game pre and post launch has been a fundamental change in the design philosophy and structure of many titles, from independent to the AAA space. And in the last time we talked about this, we brought up independent developers and kind of being forced or coerced by their fan bases to keep making a game. For today, we're going to talk about studios that fully embrace games as a service from a design standpoint, and how this has led to some very interesting discussions about not only the quality of a game, but what is considered like a fair state to release it in. And the studio in question that's kind of our main example for tonight is, of course, Paradox Interactive, a studio that has firmly and wholeheartedly embraced games as a service or live service for its titles. Now, if you somehow don't know who we're talking about, Paradox has kind of cornered the market on grand strategy games, from Crusader Kings, Rebellion Universalis, and so on, and they've also published other niche genres, such as city building with City Skylines, and the city builder-esque kind of game Surviving Mars, which is kind of the reason for today's video. But what they've done in terms of embracing live service is that their games will go through fundamental changes post-release, to the point that it's not even the same game in a lot of cases from launch to where it is now. And this has led to, again, Paradox being one of the best and worst examples of what live service has done to game design and game development. Now, the reason for this post has to do with Surviving Mars, like we've said, and a review of its latest expansion, Green Planet, over on Rock Paper Shotgun. And the expansion itself came about a little over a year after the initial release of the game. And there were two quotes in that piece that kind of raised some major red flags for me. And the first one should be going up any second now, where my lovely finger is pointing. But when it comes to live service, one of the more common criticisms by critics of it is that it's led to developers being lazy or releasing inferior products with the intent of patching or getting the real version out weeks or months down the line. And what we've seen over the last few years have been games that have either had a really successful launch and then completely change or grow over release or post release, or games that have used live service as kind of the saving grace or reviving this game in the eyes of consumers. Now, live service at its best takes a game that was already good and makes it even better. Team Fortress, League of Legends, and even Payday 2 are all great examples of this. If you bought any of those games day one, you were getting a finished product, an enjoyable one, and one where all the content works. It never felt like there was anything missing, nothing was cut. 1.0 was a great product. The downside, and again where this criticism of live service comes in, is the fact that we've seen many developers use live service as a way of releasing a bare bones game or a barely finished title, and then using this as the way of fixing the game or essentially having free public testing of your game to figure out what went wrong with it. For those of you who missed my review of Swag and Sorcery, both Swag and Sorcery and Graveyard Keeper by Lazy Bear Games had some very big issues at 1.0 in terms of their design, and Graveyard Keeper received multiple patches and quality of life fixes. And while that is certainly great, the stuff that was caught could have been seen like from a mile away. Like, these weren't issues that needed to be found, after 15-20 hours of play. Most often, it only took about 15 to 20 minutes to start to see these issues rise up. Now, like we've said a few minutes ago, we've also seen developers use live service as a way of saving a game that had a poor launch. Both Brigador and Skyshine's Bedlam had relaunches following extensive patching and reworking that led to those games being better. And that is a great thing, but that should be the exception to the rule and not part of your design process. Now, one thing that a lot of people have argued when it comes to live service, and having to do with a quote that I put up on the screen before, the first thing is that if you're going to develop your game as a live service game, you shouldn't expect the game to be perfect at launch. And that is a very big problem. And when I was reading this, I was talking to other Josh about this, both of our minds kind of like went into red alert mode as we were reading that quote. And the problem is that when it comes to these kinds of games, we still should expect some level of quality. There should be something, or the game that I get at 1.0 should be a finished game. Not finished as in all the content has been developed, it's bug free, and all that. But the 1.0, like this version of the game, should be a complete and solid game. I should not be finding design issues, systemic problems, quality of life issues in this version of your game. I shouldn't be playing a version that you then tell me, oh, you're having these problems? Don't worry, we'll get to that in the next 3 to 6 months. Now, like we've said, when games as a service or live service works at its best, is that this game is already great, and it gets better from there. And with a lot of these titles, like with Payday 2, that the game was already solid. And I have another example that we'll talk about after our video game split. But, like we've said, if the game is great, live service makes it better. It shouldn't be used as the band-aid or stopgap for these issues. Most notably over the last few years were cases of Sea of Thieves and No Man's Sky. Both games bounced back in big ways, especially No Man's Sky. But let's not forget, that launch was perhaps one of the worst in terms of a AAA or even just a reception of a game that we've seen in a long time. And that takes me to another point that people have mentioned when it comes to live service games, and about people who complain about it. They argue that you shouldn't complain about playing a game that grows and fixes issues because you got to play the game before anybody else, or you played it earlier. And that is not a valid point, for a very important reason. The version of a game now is in many times fundamentally different than the version at 1.0. League of Legends, Team Fortress 2, Payday, and any other of these live service games that you can think of had fundamental and systemic changes to their designs over the years of development. Team Fortress added in brand new modes, the side grade system, man versus man mode, and elements that were never conceived at 1.0. Payday 2 had similar aspects, with the idea of the pre-planning system, safe houses, the prestige mode, or I think it was Infamy, as it was called. These are elements that fundamentally change the game. And like we've said, this is on top of bug fixes and quality of life. So telling somebody that you shouldn't complain about a game receiving all these additional updates and features because you already got to play it doesn't work in this situation. And most importantly, as we've talked about previously with live service, this can lead to cases where a game could actually get worse through its live service if a developer makes grand changes like that nobody enjoyed. The Gwent Homecoming update has been very polarizing among fans and supporters of that game. When Payday 2 introduced the microtransaction safes, that also led to a lot of problems. And again, you run into this issue. If this is a live service game, and it changes for the worse, what's your recourse? If I've been playing this game for 3 years, and you decide to throw a patch that completely ruins the experience, what can I do? Again, that's a legitimate question. What option does the fan have? They can't return a game after 3 years. We all know that's not going to fly on any digital store. But getting back to the other point, the other quote from this article, this is what happens, or what led to this video, is when a game receives such a massive change that it retroactively makes the game worse if you don't have it. And that has to again do with Surviving Mars and the Green Planet update. The second quote from the Rock Paper Shotgun piece should be going up right now in the corner there. But Surviving Mars has, from what we play and from valid criticisms, there's definitely a lack of in-game content or things to do throughout the game. Once you figure out how to play it, it generally works the same way every time. But what the Rock Paper Shotgun review has been praising Green Planet for is introducing a brand new game system that integrates from beginning to end of the game, thereby solving or at least alleviating one of the main design issues. Now, that's great. That is a cause for celebration, except for one little problem. The only way you get that update is you have to buy it. And I think the expansion is $20 on the major stores right now, maybe on sale. And this raises a very big issue. And again, this is part of Paradox's strategy for their games. It is a common joke among Paradox Interactive fans that the best way to play their games is, if you're a big fan, buy it day one, and then don't touch it for 6 months to a year, and then wait for those expansions. Or just wait for the Game of the Year edition, buy it then. Because what they've done is they don't just introduce quality of life or aesthetic packages in their DLC. Many of their expansion content for their games is literally adding in new gameplay systems and loops to their titles. So much so that, like we've said, playing Crusader Kings or your Versailles or Solaris at launch, and then playing it with all the expansions and updates at this moment in time, it's practically two different games. And the reason why they do this is twofold. One, like we've said, is that their whole structure is massive post-release support. And the other things, it allows them to pick and choose or safely update their game without touching, again, this 1.0 version. If they release an expansion that everybody hates, nobody likes this game system, it is a complete dud, they don't have to worry about that tainting the original version of the game. But herein lies the problem. What about if the expansion is the main reason you should be playing this game? From the quote in the review I mentioned, and I'll include a link to the review down below, the reviewer said that this is what Surviving Mars should have been day one. Now, that is a ringing endorsement for the DLC, but it raises a very big problem. If I buy Surviving Mars with all this DLC, what kind of version of this game I'm buying? And this is, again, one of the major points a lot of people have about live service. That you can't really just play this game. You can't just buy the base version. Especially when you add in game system affecting changes to it. So I'm sitting here debating with myself that if I'm going to buy Surviving Mars while it's on sale, I basically have to buy the Game of the Year edition, or I don't buy the game at all. Because if I just buy the vanilla game, I'm missing out on what a lot of people are saying is the real game, or the major game system. And that is not good. Like we said a few minutes ago, 1.0 of your game should be the very best version. I should not be having problems with 1.0. With Surviving Mars' case, we have a systemic issue in terms of progression that a lot of people have pointed out. Now, getting back to Payday 2, for instance, what they've done very wisely over the years is that any system affecting changes or additions to the core gameplay loop of Payday 2 have always been free. The pre-planning system was integrated, safe house customization, different difficulty settings, prestige, you name it. That stuff was always free because they did not want to separate the base game in terms of who bought what. Now, with Surviving Mars, of course, I know what a few of you are about to say down below, that this was post-release support. This is not content that was cut or removed from 1.0 that was then put in, when the developer felt like it. They worked on this game for an additional year after release, so they should be rewarded for that content. And yes, that is fair. But again, you have to look at this from the consumer standpoint, that if somebody's going to recommend Surviving Mars, they have to have that caveat saying, don't buy this game without this expansion because you are missing a critical system. And that is a very weird issue to have. It's almost akin to saying you're going to a dealership, you buy the car of your dreams, you love it, you spend the money, the dealer gives you your receipt and then says, hey, you really enjoyed this car, for additional $300, we'll add in brake pads for you. Or brakes. It's like, wait, if that was important to the running of this car, shouldn't that be included in that initial purchase? And again, it's a very sticky situation when it comes to live service. Because like we've said, these games can fundamentally change. Sometimes for the worse, but most of the time for the better. And if 1.0 of your game is not the best version of your game, then what does that say to someone who wants to buy your game and realize it may only be on sale for $5, but I still have to spend maybe $20 to $30 more in DLC to get the real version of it? Now, with that said, we're going to do a quick Patreon supporter and shoutout break, and while I don't have sadly any footage of this game yet, I want to talk about one of the best examples of how live service made a game fundamentally better without upsetting the initial version. And now for a quick thank you to our Patreon supporters and current Game Wisdom sponsors. If you would like to continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, link down below. Apparently, Past Josh lied. I did have footage of the game that I wanted to talk about. This is, of course, XCOM with the Enemy Within expansion. And Firaxis with XCOM and XCOM 2 have done exemplary jobs in terms of their DLC and post-release support. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that neither one of these games could be considered a live service title. And that, I think, is the kind of the big distinction here. But the reason why I like both of these games in terms of their expansion work is what the developers did. With both XCOM and XCOM 2, buying those games at day 1, 1.0 release, you were getting a finished game. Granted, there were some bugs and issues that had to be stomped out after release, but in terms of all the gameplay loops, in terms of the systems, they were all designed exactly how Firaxis wanted. And what they did was when it came time to update the games with Enemy Within for XCOM and War of the Chosen for XCOM 2, they basically looked at the design and figure out how to grow the game in ways nobody thought was going to be a feature, and made them even better. With both of those games, it is considered by the fans that if you're going to buy them, you want those expansions, due to the amount of work and greater content they added in. Now, that's the same thing that we were saying about the Surviving Mars expansion with Green Planet, but here's the difference. Nobody was complaining about the features and additions before they were added in XCOM and XCOM 2. And that's like the brilliant part. Like I said, if anyone has a connection at Firaxis, please tell them I want to get them on for a cast, because I want to talk to them about this. But with War of the Chosen and Enemy Within, the features that were put into these games nobody, like, even for myself, like, I had no idea, like, this kind of content was going to be added into these games. But I can't imagine playing either XCOM or XCOM 2 without them anymore. Now, to be fair, there were quality of life improvements, such as upgrading the UI with War of the Chosen. But game systems such as the various factions, the actual Chosen kind of being like emergent enemies on the field, among the updates such as the greater personalization options, all that stuff, nobody after XCOM 2 came out were thinking, this is what I want in this game. But like we've said, those changes are so fundamental now to that design and improve things so much that you can't go back. And that, I think, is the difference. When I look at Surviving Mars, it's a case of I either buy it with the expansions or I don't buy it at all. With XCOM, it was a case of I can still buy this game and enjoy the gameplay loop from beginning to end, but the expansions will make it better. And like we said in the last part, this is the ultimate goal of live service and why so many developers and publishers want to keep doing this. Because when it works, you are essentially printing money at that point. You have a game that everybody loves, that you're making better so that more people keep talking about it, and it's a game that you already know is popular, so you don't have to worry about releasing an untested or unproven IP. So why wouldn't you keep working on a game to keep making it better? Well, as we talked about before in the last video, there are several reasons, but I'll leave that to that one. But to begin to wrap things up, live service or continued support of a game has led to a very weird push and pull between what is considered acceptable for a game to be released at and what kind of content should be released for free or be charged for. Like I said in the last part, 1.0 of your game is a big deal, and people should not be finding gameplay related issues at 1.0. If they do, then it is your job to fix those. And when I say fix them, I don't mean charging somebody for those solutions. And like we've said, it's a very weird situation when a game gets so much support that it fundamentally changes like that. But for people watching this, and I still have a few more things to talk about, but I know I have a few Paradox Interactive fans who follow me. I want to hear what you think. What are your thoughts on the live service model and what Paradox has done? Are you supporting it or do you not like it? And if you don't like it, what do you consider to be a fair solution that should make everybody happy? Now, with these kinds of games, I don't think that it shouldn't be too much to ask for that 1.0 of your game should be finished. And again, that's where that whole quote from the last part kind of drove me up the wall for a few minutes. But again, with so much work being done to keep these games in the eye and continue to grow them, you should never forget about what it means to just buy the game vanilla. And if your vanilla offering is not good or still has issues to it, you have to at least give the player something to fix that. You could even just have like a basic version of a patch or DLC, and then give, like the expanded or the extended version with the purchase. Again, with Payday 2, the pre-planning system was eventually integrated into all aspects of the game. But the major maps that made use of it, such as the Big Bank being the first one, that was a DLC purchase. You had to buy that or join somebody's game who did buy that to enjoy it. But you have to be really careful how you segment your designs like this. Because again, if you are releasing like 10 expansions with 10 completely different systems to it, I really want to know how you're going to explain that tutorial-wise to a new player. But again, that is a discussion that we could spend another hour on here. But thank you so much for watching this video. Be sure to check out our Discord and Patreon link down below. And let me know if there's any other topics you'd like me to cover in an upcoming video. But otherwise, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. If you're looking for a book on design, my first title, 20 Essential Games to Study, is out now. It is available where most books are sold, and it comes in paper, hardcover, or digital copies. This is the perfect book for anyone interested in learning about game design, whether you are a student, enthusiast, or just a fan. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.